Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Untitled Reviews, this being a show where we talk about dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Kung Fu. A lot of interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, obviously we had the whole Nikki and Henry situation of them looking deeper into trying to find out what this key goes to. Henry ends up reading a book because he decides, like, well, if we can't find out, about this key, let's find out what the key goes to. And they end up kind of like finding, like, there's this old Chinese folklore story about a girl going on a quest to find a box, and it turns out the design on the box in the story matches the design from the key, and so they end up tracking down the box. But like this basically rich dude who collects stuff has the box. Well, he's going to be out of town, so Henry and Nikki decide to kind of break in. Obviously kind of hinting to, I guess, some of like Henry's past, which we kind of unveil a bit in this episode. To be fair, like, he did the whole lockpicking thing before, so it's like, yeah, this kind of comes a little, this kind of is in his wheelhouse, so that should have come a little obvious. But they broke into the dude's house and ended up finding a box, but sadly, Jilon had already hired a dude named Razor to steal it, so he kind of like kicks both Henry and Nikki's butts and ends up taking it. But Henry, knowing kind of criminal connections, knows a dude named Randall who he ends up offering this statue that he had found amongst that rich dude's stuff, because it was like a statue that of Chinese culture that was like lost for so long, and it's something that should belong in a museum. It's like the Chinese government has been looking for it for a very long time. It's just like, oh, this rich dude has, and like most likely has no intentions of giving it back, and if he did, he'd most likely ask for like an absorbent amount of price, and even if it'd probably be a thing of he probably wouldn't want to give it up because he's so much of a collector. And for Henry, that sat wrong with him, because it's like, this is like such a big part of history and it shouldn't just be locked away in some dude's place. So we see him give it to Randall later on, and that's after Nikki kind of found out about Henry's past, because Evan's been looking into it, which even Nikki calls him up and being like, whoa. The fact is that you looked into his juvie files, that those are sealed. Like, you have to get like special permission for like a judge to be able to get someone's files, like, someone's juvie files kind of revealed like that. So kind of shows Evan kind of crossing a line. To be fair, this is Nikki, it's someone he cares about, so he just wants to make sure she's not mixed up with the wrong person. But which Nikki didn't appreciate him doing that. To be fair, Evan kind of had your back, because he kind of covered for the fact that there's security footage of you and Henry breaking into the Professor Chow's like office or whatever. But Nikki found out about Henry stealing that statue and giving it to Randall, and yeah, it gave them the information necessary, but it's a thing of like, right, it's like, because it makes her feel like, whoa, like, we went in there for one purpose, like, this is about Jilon and stopping what she's doing, trying to collect the 8 weapons. We're not just common thieves beyond that. So for her, she was kind of upset, especially because she was spending so much, like, because obviously her and Althea had the whole conversation earlier in the episode about her kind of having a thing for Henry, and Henry kind of obviously being into her. She's like, well, it's not obvious that he's, no, it's like, no, it's super obvious that he's into you as well. But, so she kind of felt, I think in that moment, kind of betrayed, because this is someone she's trusted with everything. He was the first person, well, I'm trying to think. I think she confided in Evan first about Jilon, but obviously, like, Henry's the person she's entrusted that with, like, every step of this thing. Like, yeah, Evan knows some of it, but Henry's the only person that knows every step of the way, of what's kind of involved in all this. So it kind of felt like she was being betrayed by him, which for him, it's like, whoa, you had Evan pull my files? It's like, well, he did it on his own, which she's like, that's a whole mess in its own right. But the fact is that there's this stuff about you. He's like, if you wanted to know, all you had to do was ask. They end up finding Razor because he's actually a friend of Randall's, because obviously they run in that kind of similar circle, and so Randall Razor is surprised when we find out who he is. I feel like it's something more recent I've seen him in. I know, like, one of the things I've seen him in is Van Helsing, because I went back and rewatched season 4 prior to season 1 coming up. I'm trying to remember his character's name. Was it Jeremy? The last time we saw him, he was with Jolene in season 4. I think that's the last time we saw. But I feel like there was something more recent I'd seen that actor, and I just can't place it. That might be it, but I feel like there was something else, but I could be wrong. regardless, it was kind of interesting, like, you know, and he's kind of like, it's like, okay, so I got the box, I'm gonna kill you guys, but for them it's like Nikki places a bet with him because he's a bit of a gambler, so it's like, hey, I'll give you this key, and it's like, well, what's to say I don't just kill you and take the key? It's like, but you have your code. The fact of the matter is, you kind of want to turn this into a competition, so a fight between us. Yeah, we lost last time, but this time it's going to be a fair fight, you know, you versus me. And I'm curious, they were kind of hinting to it, making it seem like maybe, Razor is into kung fu, like he's into martial arts, because he's like, oh, like, do you study Shaolin? Like the moment he saw Nikki's stances, so it kind of seems like maybe he's someone who just, and he like during the fight he ends up referencing like a particular like martial arts movie. So I think maybe he's just one of those people that's kind of like a bit of a weeb, in the sense that like, oh, he's super into martial arts because he grew up into it, so he's kind of like like he loves the culture, and so he studied it. I don't know, like maybe he just naturally is someone. But it seemed like it came from a place of like, oh, like I was super into martial arts, and he's kind of a fan of it, and like obviously like he kind of got off and he really enjoyed this, and he talks about, you know, like, oh, like a good fighter is able to, martial artist is able to kind of move their weakness, and obviously if like for Nikki, like it's been her hand this entire episode, but then like during the fight she ends up whooping his ass by being like, yeah, but the thing is that doesn't apply to me, I have no weakness. Because I think it's supposed to kind of imply, like, despite the pain that she's going through, like, she uses it more as motivation rather than a weakness. Maybe that's what that's kind of implying. But Randall is kind of like, you know, a man of his word, so he ended up ultimately, you know, afterwards it's like, oh, well, here's the box, open it up. He's like, I'm actually interested to find out what it is. And then it ends up being the pieces to the scalpel that Nikki ends up putting together. It's the scalpel for the sword, so it makes sense why Jilin was kind of after it as well. Granted, they don't know that like she's got the second weapon, or she's got 2 of the 8 weapons now. So I thought that was kind of interesting. But also, like, Razor, it's like, well, yeah, like, I mean, all Jilin asked him for was the box, so it's like, yeah, he threw it, it's like, oh, throw in a little extra, here's the key, and to nothing because Nikki's already taken the scalpel. I'm curious, does Jilin know that, I'm curious, does she know that Nikki's even alive? Like, I don't know if Razor, like, we know Razor was like, yeah, I got the box. We don't know if he told her, like, oh yeah, like, someone's actually come look, like, there was competition for it. I don't know if he went into that information, because maybe that wasn't necessary. Because I feel like if there being competition, maybe that in a way could lower the price, or maybe it bumps out the price because it's like, oh, I went through a lot of trouble to get this for you. I mean, granted, he's probably not going to say anything now because it's like, oh, I got what you wanted. Like, because either like Jilan's going to be pissed, like, did you take the scalpel? And it's like, he could probably lie and be like, no, it's already gone. Or she's already got the feeling like, you know, maybe she knows someone else is involved. Like I said, I don't, because she knocked Nikki off a cliff, so she thinks Nikki is potentially dead. So I don't know. But maybe she thinks there's a third party involved, but she doesn't know that it's Nikki. Hopefully things don't turn out terrible for Razor, because we've seen who Jilin is. That she's ready and willing to kill anyone in her path, and he has the information she needs. So, like I said, maybe Razor can skirt that line by being like, "Yep, I have no idea," or he could ultimately end up disappearing. But Jilin's got the money and resources to track him down if necessary. So we've got that. But this episode also brought Nikki and Henry closer together, because he kind of confided in his circumstances. Like, he brings up the fact is that he grew up poor, and he was mainly raised by his grandmother. He kind of got mixed up with the wrong crowd, and when he got out of juvie, he ended up taking like a Chinese history community class, and for him, that made him kind of feel like, oh, I found my, like, that thing in life that clicked. It made him feel like he kind of found his purpose, because for him it's like, maybe on some level, maybe it's just like, oh, I found my roots to some level. And that's why, like, seeing someone like that rich dude just have like something so heavily tied to Chinese culture and history locked away, it's like, this is history, like, this is something that's very important, and it shouldn't just be like locked away. It should be something that everyone can celebrate. So, like, yeah, he gave it to Randall, but he does that because Randall's in the business of taking stuff like that and making sure it gets in the right hands, kind of like, you know, reappropriating it to the right people, essentially. So it kind of shows you that like Henry's kind of on that Robin Hood stuff, kind of using his criminal past and connections. Because it seems like, once again, those files were from when he was in juvie, so it doesn't seem like he's done anything terrible since. But it's also like, Robin Hood given to the rich, stealing from the rich and given to the poor. So it seems like, he's using his skills as a thief, his criminal past, and trying to do good with it, especially in a sense of helping Nikki, which that was a thing too for Nikki. It's like, Henry shouldn't have had to tell her his past. It's like what she was saying, because it's like, you've helped me out every step of the way without question. The fact is, there's stuff that we don't know about each other. There's stuff I haven't told you about my past, and it's only, and you haven't told me, and that's okay, but I do trust you. So she's even leaving the scalpel in his hands, as I look after this for both of us. And once again, there is a part of me that's still a little distrusting of Henry. Like, we might get a reveal of but I think with now his past being revealed that everything's good. Granted, this is probably going to complicate things between Nikki and Evan, but it also kind of implies is this just from the perspective as exes the reason why you did that, or is there still, running into Nikki after these 3 years kind of like reignited that flame, even though you're with someone else, that maybe it's like, some of those sparks are still alive, and you're just like, right, you just want to, it's more than just like, oh, my ex is in trouble, maybe mixed up with the wrong guy. It's like, no, like you're someone that, it's not just an ex thing, it's someone you care about, so we'll see what kind of comes of that, because obviously the Scalberts also, really quickly, we learned last episode, obviously it has some part to play because the sword isn't fully powered without it. So obviously the Scalbert's got secrets of its own, but obviously combined with the sword, it fully unlocks its potential. So at the very least, maybe things won't be complete, even if Jilin ends up getting the other 6 weapons without the Scalbert. Like, the sword isn't technically complete, so she can't get like all-powerful type of situation. Maybe not. We'll see whether the Scalbert's going to be the next thing that she goes after, or whether she just continues her hunt for the other 6 weapons. We'll see. Because obviously for Nikki, it's like, no matter what they've done, Jilin has always been a step ahead of them. So this is one of the opportunities where they've kind of like got the upper hand on her, at least to some extent. At least everything's kind of led them to this point. So beyond that, we'll ultimately have to wait and see where things kind of go on that front. Another kind of like smaller element to this story is the Joe and Ryan situation. Obviously, Joe kind of helping, like, Ryan's like been very dedicated to work and stuff like that, and Joe's trying to get him to like come out with him to an art show and stuff like that, but he's so distracted with work, not kind of really appreciating the photography and the art the way he should. But it's also because for Ryan, it's like he kind of opens up the fact is, yeah, he's had hookups and like, yeah, he's, things have happened, but he's never been on a continuous date with the same person. He's never been in like a very monogamous relationship, so this is all new to him, which obviously for Joe, it's like, I can obviously tell, but the fact of the matter is, they're kind of, taking things in stride and kind of working things out, and it's, it's kind of beautiful, like, with all these different relationships, because obviously we get, like, the fun between, like, Mei and Jin as well, them kind of having their fun relationship, because it's like, Nikki was initially being like, oh wow, is this a particular thing? And like, he's like, yeah, there's like a fusion dish, and it's like, mom doesn't like surprises, so that's not, because like Melee is trying to like make a good impression on Dennis's parents, because it's like a special dinner and like his parents are like super well off, and so it's kind of a thing of like, right, we're kind of like on a poor end, but it's like, yeah, like our recipes and how we've done stuff has gotten 3 kids through college, so it shouldn't be looked upon as kind of what Jen's perspective was. But yeah, especially because it's like, they're in a position where like Althea is also taking like is learning Cantonese, which Jen's like, I speak Cantonese as well, but it's more of a situation of like, they're kind of like, I guess like maybe like a more new money type of situation, and it's like, we're kind of like old school country folk, so that like disparity and like social status, it's kind of like getting to them, especially when Althea shows up later on, because it's like, oh, she's in this like beautiful outfit, she's got this beautiful like family heirloom from Dennis's side of the family, from Dennis's family, like around her neck. So it makes Mei Lee kind of feel like, oh, like we're just not good enough. It's like, oh, you show up here with a gift, like, oh, champagne from 1990 when we both immigrated here, you know. So it's just kind of like, right, we're just not that well off, and we're, you know, this isn't the normal, like you guys would have normally like gone to this very like specific like high class restaurant, and you know, because Mei Lee wanted to kind of prove a point, like, you know, she kind of took over things, and so it's like, so I can do this, everything's okay, like, just kind of trying to prove a point, like, that we're not just kind of, once again, kind of like, poor folk or whatever, that we can handle things too, and, you know, they were trying to, like, show out, at least Mei Lee is trying to, like, you know, show them up at least a little bit, but, obviously for Althea, it's like, oh, it's not as disastrous as I thought it was going to be, and so it's kind of a nice dinner and everything. Duck is being served, and but then comes the bomb where it's like, oh, also we've been talking about it, Althea, we want you to sign a prenup, and Dennis was like, wait, what the hell are you guys talking about? It's like, oh, and like, you know, Dennis's mom is like, oh, I figure we should have waited. And for him, it's like, no, it's not a waiting thing. This should have never been a conversation. It's like, oh, well, we're trying to be respectable. Respectable would be not bringing this up at all. And see, this is happening at the same time Althea's dealing with the fact is that the reporter, Bridget, contacted her saying, like, it's okay, like, another woman's already decided to speak up. The article about him is going to drop. So I was curious, like, if that was going to be the case, that maybe, you know, eventually, I thought that was going to be potentially where the story was going to go, where that got dropped, like, during dinner, and it's like, wait, Althea, your boss, it's like, wait, he did this, like, did it ever happen to you? I thought that might be where we were going, but it didn't, because it turns out the woman in particular backed out, so for Bridget, it's like, hey, the case is going cold. So on top of, like, dealing with the prenup kind of being thrown in her face, plus that, like, Althea just kind of, like, called them out. It's like, oh, because obviously there was an earlier conversation about, like, oh, her and, like, Nikki were having a conversation about, you know, this almost being like an old school tradition of, like, oh, so I'll give you, like, 3 cows for your daughter type of thing of, like, you know, it's a very, like, old school traditional, like, bartering system, like, some cultures have, like, way back in the day. And obviously can still apply today, even present day in certain cultures. So Althea kind of started feeling like that. She kind of felt like cattle, like, okay, like, what am I worth? It's like, oh, like, the fact is I'm worth ducks. Like, you know, it's like, because of my, like, my figure as a Chinese woman, like, oh, I guess I'm worth this amount of ducks. So it was a thing of, like, it's a conversation of her worth. You know, it's like, oh, like, you know, is that why you gave me this necklace? Saying that it looks nice on me, but it's like, because with this necklace, I have more worth. It was more so about that, like, you know, with her boss and stuff like that, but it still kind of fit, like, the conversation that was going on, because it was like, oh, like, I'm not marrying Dennis for his money, you know that, right? But the fact is that you, like, oh, I, like, because of her background, like, it's like, if I came from a different background, would we even be having this conversation? But because I'm not from, like, the most well-off, like, established family, like, you're just assuming I'd be coming after Dennis's money. And once again, good guy Dennis, and I love that this showcase, like, oh, he's a good guy too, in the sense that, like, he immediately shut his parents down, which immediately he even commented, like, yeah, but I think your mom kind of really enjoyed, like, you know, them kind of getting knocked down a peg or two, so I think it kind of all worked out. But he immediately could tell, like, when Althea was done, like, you know, and she was like, oh, I don't want to go back, he's like, you can, we should. He's like, but this wasn't just about a prenup, there's more. And it's like, do you want to talk about it? She's like, not yet. So, and, you know, Jen and Mei Lee kind of celebrating, like, oh, do you see the look on their face? It's like, yeah, like, we told our daughter to be respectable to the elders. Obviously, that applies in a lot of cultures, but that's a very strong element in the Asian culture in general. It's like respecting your elders, like, you know, seniority, you know, always takes precedence in a lot of aspects of Asian culture. But it's like, yeah, in this instance, it's a good thing she didn't listen to us. And we thought Nikki was the stubborn one, like the strong-willed one and everything. And it's like, you know, Jen joking, being like, I wonder where they got it from, you know? So I thought that was kind of a nice, like I said, it's just the couples and everything. But at the end of the episode, we had, you know, Althea opening up to Nikki, because it's like, okay, let me tell you about Henry. How was dinner? It's like, yeah, there was a whole prenup and everything. But then Nikki opened up about everything, you know, and, you know, sadly, you know, it's that circumstance of a victim kind of like turning against themselves, because for her, it's like, it wasn't all at once. His abuse was like step by step. It's like a little thing here, some comments there about like proportions of her, like her boobs to her butt, and it's just like, okay, inappropriate stuff here. Then it was a thing of like, I made a mishap, and so he kind of pushed me away, but then he wanted me to be desperate to kind of be back in his good graces, so any advances he'd make, I just kind of go with it just so I could be in his good graces. So like, I touch on his knee, on my knee, and it went, you know, like I said, it went further. And for her, she was saying like how messed up it is that like for her, it's like, because I think there's actually layers to this. I don't know about the men in general, but I think there's also like, you could also make a commentary on, because she's an Asian woman too, and Asian women have been like fetishized. So I think, once again, like if he's a non-Asian man, I mean, I'm not saying it excuses either way, Asian, non-Asian, whatever the case may be, he's a scumbag for doing what he did. But I'm saying, especially if he's not Asian, there could be a commentary on that. It's because she's an Asian woman and she's fetishized in his mind. Not only is he power tripping, but he's also looking at her as like, because she's a less than, because she's an Asian woman. Like that could be also something that they could be commenting on. Like I said, it could be, like I said, I feel like that could be something if her ex-boss turned out to be, you know, non-Asian, I think, in that regard. I mean, it's still the commentary on, like, someone in a powerful position abusing it either way, but it's like, it could take an even deeper step, like, with the fetishization of Asian women, in that particular case, if that ended up going down the route. But, for her, it was this, like thing she hated, where it's like there was some relief in her knowing that there were other women, because it was a situation where it's like, okay, now it's like, okay, hearing that there was some other woman, it's a terrible thing to know that he did this to someone else, that there are other women like that, but at the very least in her mind, it's like, it means I don't have to speak up. Like, I can keep quiet, and the responsibility falls on someone else. So she was saying, like, I know it's kind of messed up. There was, like, some relief in that. And I can understand that, because it's, like, this thing of, like, it wasn't just you. You aren't the only victim. I think, like, knowing that someone else is out there, but someone else being the braver person in her mind, you know? Because I don't think it is a thing of, like, oh, you're a coward for not speaking. I think it's just, like, that's, once again, it's a situation, like, I can't, like, empathize. I can sympathize, and you know, but it's like I can never empathize and know exactly what it's like to be under those circumstances of, like, you know, dealing with that trauma of, like, you know, being abused, like, you know, and carrying that weight with you. And so for her, you know, she would, like I said, she was at least a little relieved knowing, like, maybe someone else can be brave and speak up. But now for her, it's like, now that person backed out too, and now it's like neither one of us can speak. Like, she's like, I know I should be the one to speak up, you know, not just for me, but for all the, not just this other woman either, but like for all the women that he might have abused. But for her, it's just like, I just can't do it. And Nikki's not judging her or anything, it's just being there for her, because it's like, I'm sorry, you know, this terrible thing happened to you. I'm sorry I wasn't there for you, because it happened in those 3 years that Nikki was gone, you know. So I think Nikki's probably going to do what she can to help out her sister potentially next episode. And I'm sure that's going to be a complicated thing of, like, right, because Nikki's the only person that knows. Their parents don't know. Dennis doesn't know. Ryan doesn't know. So it's kind of her thing. So Nikki probably wanting to help. It's like, don't do this, like, because now you're going to make it bigger of a thing. Like, my circumstances, rather than it just being mine and for me, they like deal with it in my own way and my own time. Like, maybe Nikki getting involved kind of might force her hand. So that potentially could be a route we see. Whether it's next episode or not, that's a whole thing. But yeah. I think that's an element we'll, you know, potentially see going forward with Althea's story. Like I said, whether that's next episode or not, I think that's where we could see that storyline going. So I am really interested to see ultimately where all of this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.